It was an action, as you rightly describe, regarding pothole repairs.
I'm
Oh, okay. How's that? Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Thank you for raising it, Councillor King. It was a matter to the previous chair and vice chair of the committee, and it wasn't felt as it was something that could be taken forward as a review to the policy. What I'll do, though, is keep the action live, and I'll pick up an action to speak to the current chair and vice chair of the committee for their views on that particular point, and then feedback to you. If that's okay.
I think, if I may, Mr. Chairman, just follow that up. It is very important because a number of my parish councils would be quite willing to contribute an additional amount of money so that potholes that don't reach the intervention levels but are in the vicinity of the intervention level potholes, so that they could be repaired. Now, that would obviously be in the county's interest as well as my constituents, and I suspect all of our constituents. So I think it does happen elsewhere. I believe I did do some research on it ages ago, and I think Devon does that. So, you know, this is not something that is completely out of left field, and I think that it's best practice and we ought to embrace it. Thank you.
Okay, interesting point. Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on what Councillor Murphy was referring to, and we're going to have it, I believe, King's Parade is coming back. But for an action log, can we make sure that the security guidance that I believe was conducted by Bedford Police for the counter-terrorism aspect of that, so that we can see sight of that, so we can have a proper understanding of the risk assessment that was done at the time. Thank you.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Anything else on the action log, members? Okay, so I think if there are no other comments, then we approve with those amends and those suggestions, the changes to the action log. Thank you very much. Item 3, actually listed on here on the website as item 2, is petitions and public questions, democratic services.
Thank you, Chair. We've received a couple of public questions, and we'll take those. I'll read those at the appropriate time on the agenda.
That's fine. Okay, thank you. So item 4, this is the integrated transport block strategy aims funding allocation. So there are 4 items in the agenda. One is a review of those schemes that the status for those that were delayed. Secondly, it's the criteria for the 1.346 million of planned programs going forward, and the individual amounts and the scoring for those amounts. So can I please ask Elsa, is Elsa with us, Elsa Evans, to present the report?
Yes, can you hear?
She should appear on screen in a moment.
Okay.
Can you hear?
Good morning, Elsa.
Good morning. Can you hear? Can you see?
We can't hear you at the moment, but the man with the switches may be able to do something.
Now.
Perhaps we could explain to Elsa that it's not that we can't hear her, it's just that the volume is too low. So we
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I've turned it up.
Okay. Elsa, let's see if we can hear you again.
Yes. Can you hear now?
A little bit faintly. Let's try that.
Okay. So this report is about allocating the integrated transport block funding to projects to deliver the transport strategy aims. This is part of the 3.2 million government funding from the Department of Transport given to the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, as they are the local transport authority for the area. And the CPCA passed the money to the County Council to manage. The Highway and Transport Committee have already approved the use of this funding, this 3.2 million funding for 2021-22 back in March this year. It was allocated to different categories to spend, and it is listed in the table in paragraph 1.2. Within these budget categories is the large chunk of 1.346 million for projects to deliver the transport strategy aims. So this is the purpose of this report today, is to allocate this money to individual projects. This money, they are using a prioritization criteria based on the government guidance, the early assessment and sifting tools. And that looked at the different criteria which are set out in Appendix 2 of what they are. Now, we are already halfway through 2021-22, and this is only allocating the money now because of massive delay. Money that was allocated to last year, 2020 to 21, were substantially delayed by the COVID-19 pandemic, the national lockdown, and schemes were not able to start. So some of the most of the schemes are still carrying on to be delivered. A progress report is listed in Appendix A. The schemes that have been completed were listed first at the top and followed by schemes that were delayed in the latter part of Appendix 1. Given the reasons for some of the delay and what the current progress are. As I say, the prioritization criteria looked at different priorities. So, for example, how the schemes meet the local transport plan objectives, what are the practical deliverability, the economic case of the schemes, such as scale of the impact, value for money, and also any added road safety benefits. And also the financial case, any other alternative funding or the affordability of it. Members of the previous Economy and Environment Committee asked officers to review the methodology to trying to improve the equitability across the county. An initial review was undertaken last autumn. However, there are a lot of other interrelated strands that are in progress, and officers felt that changing or reviewing the prioritization methodology of this funding in isolation would risk disconnection. So these interlinked strands of work include the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, which were being consulted, the active travel strategy, which is in development, and also the county's future transport priorities for scheme development. So therefore, the recommendation in this report is based on the same criteria as last year and as set out in Appendix 2. Schemes for consideration withdrawn from the Cambridgeshire Transport Investment Plan. They were just a list of schemes that came from transport strategies and are deemed to be necessary for growth and development in the county. And as I said, these schemes were then scored based on the criteria set out in Appendix 2. The top scoring schemes are listed, and schemes are recommended for funding up to the limit of the 2021-22 funding, and they are listed in Appendix 3A. Any schemes below that limit are listed in Appendix 3B, and they would just stay there and be considered for other funding opportunities. So this is the recommendation.
Thank you very much, Elsa. Just before we move to the debate, we do have a question from the Milton Cycling Campaign. Dan, is that something you will read?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is from Milton Cycling Campaign. During a recent meeting in July 21 with Urban and Civic and Cambridgeshire County Council, it was discussed a possible upgrade to the Car Dyke crossing by Urban and Civic. Due to the nature of this crossing, high motor vehicle speeds and high volume of vehicles, it was suggested by Milton Cycling Campaign and other parties during the meeting if a signalised crossing would be a possibility at this crossing due to the suggested proposal not meeting LTN 120 standards. John Finney, the officer who was present at the meeting, indicated there would be a future allocation by another developer for this crossing in a few years' time. Our question is, seeing as this has already been identified as a possible improvement by Cambridgeshire County Council, the bad collision record at this junction resulting in the death of a baby boy and serious injury to his mother, and the proposed expend by Urban and Civic, wouldn't it make sense to upgrade this junction to a fully signalised junction as opposed to the staggered approach suggested, which will cost more money, more carbon cost and more disruption to its users?
Thank you. Obviously, we'll provide a full written answer. I don't know, Steve, because you've been working very closely on this after poor baby Louis Thorrell's death.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, a very, very sad incident on the A10. I think I'd like to take a look at the suggestion. We are working with Urban and Civic on the improvements that they're making as a result of their development in the area. And I'd like to take that point that's been made about signalised junctions into those discussions and see whether there's any scope to take that on board. If I can leave it at that, Chairman.
So I think we have Councillor Mandy Smith first, then Councillor Mills.
Right, basically, at the first meeting, before I go into asking about the report, can I ask who the NMU champion is? Have we got one? Because we weren't going to have a cycling one, we was going to have one for everybody.
Yes, and I think that's an outstanding action, and thanks for reminding us.
We'll add that to the action plan. Right. Okay, so will that be sorted out later, who that person? That's all right, as long as, don't worry, I'm just, so that's still to be sorted, fine. Now, bearing that in mind, the scheme, I received a few questions from basically, like I say, at the first meeting, I wanted everybody included. The equestrian people have contacted me, like the cycling people have contacted Daniel Snowden. Basically, there is an element that things are being called cycle paths, which then technically that doesn't include horses. So I'd like sort of confirmation or clarification that we are actually going to be including horses as well. Everybody, in fact, all non-motorised users, because otherwise there's a lot of money going into the pot, which is good, but it's only going to be for certain elements of the community. So I'd like sort of confirmation that if it mentions a cycle path, it's actually for everybody.
So good point. So Elsa, if you would answer that, and then we'll go to Councillor Mills.
I'm not sure who the NMU champion is, but in terms of cycling and walking schemes, it depends on the scheme itself. So if they are for NMU, then that would include partly horse riders, but they are to be guided by the usage of these facilities. So if they are proposed for including horse riders, then they are considered in the prioritisation. Not sure, does that answer your question?
No, not really. If anything, that sort of makes it a bit more confusing, which I think the chairman will understand. Basically, it's making sure that everybody is included. It's not just because we're including sort of two parts of the community, we've got to include everybody, because there's also people in wheelchairs as well. They need plenty of room as well, if two of them are side by side, for example. So I would like more clarification that we are thinking of everybody and they will be included in all these schemes.
Yes, they are. I mean, the requirements of all parts of the community or users of the communities are considered, yes.
Yeah, they've got to also be able to use that scheme at the end of the day. That's my thing. I think the chairman and the vice chairman can see where I'm going with this. And although I'm in favour of any future green routes, I am, but it has to include everybody.
Yeah, I think a very good point. Councillor Milnes.
Yeah, a couple of points. One, reference Councillor Smith's request to make sure that we're inclusive in our access systems and pathways and so on. And perhaps Councillor King's going to speak to that, because we have a local access forum that is well represented by or with the equine community, if I can call it that, who are looking to make sure that we do exactly what Councillor Smith is wanting, and to include them in all our considerations. My main point, though, was if we do support LTN 120, it seems pretty ridiculous to me to, before a crossing is built, that we don't build a LTN 120 compliant crossing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes. I think that what is desperately needed at the County Council is a policy about the type of surfaces to use for these non-motorized users. Because what tends to happen is we just chuck down a bit of tarmac, and that really is not very helpful for equine users. So what I was going to suggest later on, and I'll suggest it now, is we put on the forward agenda plan the request to officers to prepare a policy for surfaces for non-motorized users, so that there's clarity for officers and clarity for us and clarity for the people we serve.
Yeah, good point, because I think it's not clear at the moment, and we need to clarify that. And also following up from Councillor Smith's point, Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chairman. Just following on from that, my ward has got a lot of horses in it. In fact, my ward includes the July racecourse at Newmarket. So, and I attended about a month ago at Newmarket Town Council a talk from one of the Jockey Club Estates people about the surfaces, because some of these crossings in Newmarket, Cambridgeshire are in my ward. Obviously, a lot of them are in Suffolk. But I think, following on from Councillor Milne's point of view, yes, we need to be totally inclusive for everybody. But certainly, if we're looking at this, then the road surfaces on those crossings, because, okay, there are obviously some very expensive equine flesh, for want of a better word, but similarly, there are lots of pleasure, I'd call them pleasure riders who, who just ride for fun, and in my ward, as I'm sure other members have got. So looking at the surfaces, I think is important.
Yes, thank you very much. So go to Councillor Murphy, and then Dan noticed that Jeremy Smith has his hand raised on the screen. So Councillor Murphy first.
Thank you. Just going back to this list of projects that are to have funding allocated to them, and the scoring methodology, it's quite clear, I think, that a new administration would have different weighting than the previous administration, and this has been done on the basis of the previous administration's weighting. All very good projects, but it's about priorities. And looking at the first 16 projects that have not made the cut on this methodology, they're all cycling and walking, and one public transport. You have to go down to the 17th before you get to anything to do with motorised transport. So I would feel very uncomfortable simply rubber stamping this proposal, and I would request, please, a revisit of the methodology to have a reassurance that we are not simply rubber stamping a different set of priorities from what we as an administration wish to pursue.
So I'll go to Jeremy and then Elsa, or both of you may want to address that question. Jeremy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just picking up the point on surfacing. We are planning to, as Elsa mentioned, bring an active travel strategy paper to the committee later this year. And one of the things that paper would seek to pick up would be the surfacing we use, the policy requirements, the desire to hit the guidance in LTN 120, and a lot of things around that. And also, indeed, the balance between catering for all users based on usage and the costs involved. Obviously, yes, we do need to take into account every user, whether it's walking, cycling, horse riders, those with mobility impairments and the like, but we do need to be very mindful of the usage and the appropriate facility for the particular geography. So yes, we absolutely should be taking into account all users, but I would just suggest that it's going to be more relevant to consider equestrians in largely rural areas or areas where there are stables, where there's an obvious usage, and in other cases it's going to be less of an issue. But I think the fundamental point that you do need to consider all users when you're considering the facilities is perfectly valid. I would also note that in many cases, if you've got high equestrian uses and high cycle pedestrian uses, the ideal situation is to have parallel facilities. But obviously that does mean you need rather more land and rather more cost. So there's obviously at some point committee will need to put a balance on how we make those considerations and whether the perfect is the enemy of the good on occasion. But those are the things that we would seek to unpack as we bring papers forward to you, so you can take a full view on that as at a later date, which hopefully, as I say, will be later this year.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Elsa, could you address some of the questions from Councillor Murphy around the criteria and the scoring?
Yes, and it should be noted that quite a lot of the schemes, they are for scheme development. So there are still opportunities to see whether there are more schemes that could be added to it. In terms of the weighting, I've undertaken a sensitivity sort of testing. If we were to give additional weighting to, say, air quality, environment and climate change, rather than just the access to services, there is no change to which schemes are to be included in this recommendation. The individual schemes score very slightly, but it's still the same schemes that would make the list. This is not an endpoint, because there would be and might be other funding opportunities, and there is also next year's allocation that can be considered. And as I said, the methodology is going to be reviewed, and it will be tying with what Jeremy was saying, the active travel strategy, and also the CPCA is reviewing the local transport plan, and that will be included any of the changes or focus of the objectives there.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to Councillor Murphy. She has further questions. Councillor Smith, then Councillor King.
Thank you. Just briefly, I think picking up on something that Mr. Smith has just says on the screen, if I caught it right, I think we should be looking at all users in all areas, not just whether there's 1 or 100. Thank you. You're nodding, Chairman. I'm very happy with that.
Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I hope you'll forgive me this. I think what Jeremy was saying, that it's horses for courses. And he's right, of course. We shouldn't apply one solution everywhere. And that's why we need a policy which sets out what the options are so that we can understand and officers can understand. I just want to go on to a slightly different area. And I very much agree with Councillor Murphy, actually. I think this whole process is opaque at the very best. And I read this paper and I really struggled to understand how these priorities were developed. So I think however we approach this new methodology, what we need is more member involvement. And I think that's really important because certainly I don't remember I've been on this committee for the last 4 years and 5 years now. I don't remember having any significant involvement into these. So that's a real failing, I think. And just to give you an example of three, and Steve, I hope you're listening to this, because there are three things that I have raised that aren't reflected in this. One is there's mention of a cycling map for Chatteris or Whittlesea, but there's no mention of a cycling map for Wisbech, and yet I have been assured that £5,000 has been allocated for that map. The second thing is I've had an exchange of emails with Dom about a scheme at Bellamy's Bridge near Parsontrove and Murrow, and there's again no mention of that, despite this being promised 3 years ago. And finally, this is a more recent one, and again I've had an exchange of emails with Dom about this. It's and also with you, Mr. Chairman, a footpath in Back Road, Murrow. So those are three parochial things that I would have liked to have at least had an acknowledgement within this paper, even if they were being rejected, but they're not even mentioned. And I'm disappointed in that. So more transparency is the key, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Shaler briefly wants to talk about NMU and then Councillor Beckett, or the other way around.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to pick up on what Councillor Smith was saying again about all users being considered. Obviously, that is very important, but I actually have to admit, I do agree with Jeremy Smith that we do need to make sure we look at the appropriate users in that area. I, for instance, represent Cambridge City, so therefore the equestrian community is not quite so strong in the city centre, and therefore I do think we need to be aware that we are looking at the correct services for the correct users. Thank you.
That's fine, but I represent the rural area. So basically, you know, I think all inclusivity should be across the whole county, whether it's 1 or 100. So potato, potato.
Thank you. Councillor Shaler.
Yeah, I absolutely take these on board. I am actually the non-motorised champion, formerly the cycling champion, and I am a horse rider myself. So I am interested in the rural applications. This is part of active transport. And when you read this fantastic document from Public Health England, it's not only about getting from A to B, it's about living locally, community building, and all of those other health aspects of being out in the open. And so I am very happy to, I'm not sure yet, I'm still learning how I can influence this agenda, but I am very happy to hear these comments today.
So thank you for all those comments. I mean, I think I'm hearing three things. First of all, greater member involvement in this process. I think that's a feeling I get around the table. Secondly, some clear policies and policies which are locally based on the local needs seems to be clear, and transparency in the criteria as raised by Councillor Murphy. Is it the? I mean, our recommendations before us are to note the progress of the carry forward schemes, support the proposed allocation of funding to projects. Obviously, there's a timing impact. If we are we minded to support the proposed allocation if there is an understanding of further work to be done on member involvement and the criteria? Councillor Murphy.
If it assists, because I brought up the possibility of deferral subject to learning more about the methodology, but the officer has very helpfully given me the reassurance I need to support this today. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that's clear, members. Then we go with the recommendations, but on the basis of those conditions and the proposals going forward. Councillor Mills.
Just a quick one, Chair. I think I'm not sure whether it was Councillor King was talking about creating policy for specifications of surfaces. This is an outstanding issue when we've got multiple user types using the same pathways. And we've experimented, I know, recently with a gravel and supported surface, for example, that may be taken into consideration. But I think for the action log, I'm just concerned that that doesn't get lost in the other things. Thank you.
I'm sure Dan has got that in capital letters. Okay, thank you, members. That was a very useful discussion, and I think that's moved forward that whole area and the interest considerably. So thank you very much for your inputs. Okay, so members, our next item is something completely different, which is Cambridge South Station. I'd like to ask Jack Eagle, Principal Transport and Infrastructure Manager, to present the report. And then before we move to the debate, we have a question from Edward Lee from Smarter Cambridge Transport. But Jack, if I can ask you to introduce in the first place.
Yes, hello. Can you all hear me, members?
Yep.
Yeah, good. So this paper covers Network Rail's Transport and Works Act order submission for Cambridge South Station and the County Council's comments on it. It should be noted that these aren't sort of formal comments to a consultation response, but they are comments that have been collated from various officers with different technical specialisms around the County Council, and they will be sent to Network Rail for their consideration if approved by the committee. And the report also asks to delegate to the Executive Director and Chair and Vice Chair the approval of submission of any more formal documents that may be required regarding Cambridge South Station. So in summary, the report is very supportive. The Council is very supportive of the Cambridge South Station, and this backed by various policies that the County Council have in place. Network Rail submitted a Transport and Works Act order submission to the Secretary of State in June 2021, and the County Council submitted a holding objection to this, and that's available in Appendix B of the report. The reasons for that were to ensure that the protective provision it required for the guided busway and the Greater Cambridge Partnerships Cambridge South East Transport Scheme are agreed, and officers and legal specialists are working with Network Rail and the GCP to get those agreed as soon as possible so that holding objection can be removed. And going forwards, the next steps would be there's a planned inquiry for the Cambridge South Station, which is provisionally planned to start on the 22nd of November this year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jack. So before we move to the debate, then we have this question from Edward Lee. Dan, could you read that out?
Thank you, Chair. The question is as follows. The proposed response to the Network Rail TWAO application for Cambridge South Station makes no reference to the design capacity of the station, nor its integration with bus services. Smarter Cambridge Transport believes that the submitted design is seriously inadequate on both counts, as set out in the attached objection we submitted on the 2nd of August. Does the County Council recognise the merits of our arguments? If so, will it amend its response to the TWAO application and make similar points about the design capacity and integration? If not, what is the Council's contingency plan if the design capacity of the station does prove to be inadequate, or the lack of tight rail bus integration fails to support the level of modal shift required to ensure the viability of planned future expansion of the biomedical campus and growth in the catchment area for the station, including along the CSEC corridor?
Right, thank you. So we of course will provide a written answer to Edward. I'm initially looking at Steve and Dom, whether they want to make any initial comments about this right now. Okay, so then members open the debate. I think Councillor Beckett is probably the first one.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Jack, for putting together the response and for answering some of my questions on that one. I do want to go back to Edward Lee's point, actually, which is about station expansion and size. Currently, the Network Rail estimates put a 1.3% growth rate between 2030 and 2043. Now, even with the current rate of expansion without the 2050 vision of the biomedical campus, that is clearly not sufficient for the growth that we are experiencing within the Queen Edith area. It also obviously takes into account the pandemic and expecting more people to work from home, but the nature of business in that area tends to be laboratory based, tends to be hospital use, which are not areas that will be experiencing the same working from home boom as, say, the science park would, or other more tech based areas. So I do want to make sure that we emphasize, I know that Jack has added in there about the 1.3% growth, but I'll ask the Chair and Vice Chair and Steve Cox to make sure that in the final report it is emphasised that that 1.3% figure is too low and that we do need to look again about that. Also, when you look at the design of the station, it is not designed for future growth, and we need to make sure that that point is raised with Network Rail as well. Currently, looking at the plans, the only way to be able to grow the station is to impinge far more on the green belt and onto some of the clay farm recreational green space. And obviously, given the development in that area, that is not something that we would want to be doing going forwards. Further to that, there is a really large problem we have here about how the station is accessed. And while that is drawn out in the report a bit, again, I would ask the Chair and Vice Chair to make sure that this is emphasised, that there are currently only 3 drop-off and pick-up spots in the station design. Again, this is going to be the closest station to the M11 for people commuting. Now, while we really do want people to use active travel means to get to there, and we do need to make sure that it interfaces very well with the CSAT scheme, we do need to make sure that that drop-off and pick-up space is sufficient. Again, the current design, if you look at the plans, does not allow any room for expansion in the future. It's not just that it's 3 at the moment, it's 3 with no room for expansion. So we really do need to pick up on that. We also have in the local area, a lot of my residents in the 9 Wells area and Red Cross area are currently experiencing large levels of antisocial behaviour in regards to parking, especially with the biomedical campus. The Red Cross area, we recently managed to get some W yellow lines installed, but obviously they still have huge amounts of problem parking with people waiting there to pick up people from the biomedical campus. I cannot see with how this is currently designed how that problem won't get worse, and therefore I would strongly ask that the committee seeks assurances from Network Rail that there will be no adverse effects on the residents in those areas. That is really important. It is also important that we do, and this perhaps is for the mayor as well, make sure that we have onward travel from that station. Currently, it's about 10 minutes walk from the station to Addenbrooke's Hospital. There will obviously be a large number of people coming to Addenbrooke's Hospital that are unable to walk that distance. So I think that is really important that we do have the ability there for less abled people to be able to get to the station. Without that, a large amount of the station's benefits fall off. Furthermore, the final point I have is onward travel and onward connection, and that is perhaps a point for us as a highways committee, is that currently there are no plans I can see to interface this with the greater cycling network within Queen Edith's. And I think it is key that we make sure when this station is built that it interfaces with the local area and that all of the residents of the local area can use the station, and that we make sure there is provision within our budgets to be able to improve those links and pathways such that residents can access the station by those non-motorised uses. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Milnes.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I asked to speak before Councillor Beckett had finished, and he's covered many of the I want for this issue of capacity of the station, which clearly is not the anticipated current growth, never mind potential increased growth on that site. I think there's an expectation of some 32,000 visitors to that site. currently in plan. So that's a really key issue that I confirm I want to also have reinforced in our response. The connectivity to outpatients, Councillor Beckett just referred to, is really key. If you look at the typical profile of people using health services, as we know, the aged population is increasing in its size and requirement. And, you know, I had parents who in their 80s were trying to use rail services. And a particular example of getting on and off the train at Stevenage without the doors closing before they could get off, accompanied on the lifts and then off the other side, even to get to the other side of the station was a problem for them. Now, we're likely to have this station used as an entry and exit point to the hospital by users across the region. That profile of usage. Thank you.
Yes, good points. Jack, would you like to respond to some of those points?
Yeah, I think most of them are covered in the response, but we can, of course, strengthen them if that would be the desire of the I think elements are picked up, but the strength is that. Thank you.
I think we got the gist, Jack, but we lost you at the end. Councillor Sheath.
Yes, I wonder if anybody could make any comments about the future of East West Rail, which is intending to have an interface with the station. And I know they've been separated a little bit due to the different requirements and getting past regulations, but that must be also somewhere on the agenda.
Jack, if we got you back, did you hear that about East West Rail?
Yeah, I see that Jeremy's got his hand up, and he's got a lot more knowledge on East West Rail than I have, so I'll pass over to Jeremy if that's all right, Chair.
Yes, thank you. Jeremy, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, East West Rail is obviously coming forward. It's at a different stage of the process, and while in a perfect world where everything were totally joined up at every level, they would be, considered, absolutely together. It isn't happening quite with that sequencing, but the East West Rail Company and Network Rail, and indeed all the local authorities, are talking to each other, all the time on these matters. And there shouldn't be anything that is done in the context of the Cambridge South scheme that causes problems for East West Rail. Indeed, the Cambridge South scheme will provide some of the foretracking that East West Rail then needs to provide at a later date to provide capacity between Shepherd's Junction and Cambridge Station, should of course that be the route that is confirmed for East West Rail to come into the city. So I think it is a very valid point. What's probably the best thing I can say is that there isn't envisaged to be any problem in terms of capacity of the station that is being built to take trains off the East West Rail route, or for the station to cause problems of capacity into Cambridge Station once East West Rail is in. So it's a key point, but it is being thought about in detail by the rail companies and ourselves.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeremy. If there are no other comments or inputs, then I'd like to ask members if you would agree with the recommendations. Delegate to Steve as Executive Director in conjunction with myself and Jerry as Vice Chair to make comments and submission of the formal documents, and review and approve. I think we've done that de facto as detailed in Appendix A. If members are agreed, we'll move on. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your inputs. An important development. Members and members of the public and Councillor Criswell who are with us. So we move on to a very important item, road safety. There's nothing that we do as a committee, perhaps, which is more important than this area. And I know that it's an extremely important topic, especially with respect to the Wheatsheaf roundabout. I'm going to ask initially David Allett, who's Interim Assistant Director for Highways, to present the report. Then we have a statement from Milton Cycling Campaign. And then I'd like to ask Mrs. Margaret Lum to address us. And last but certainly not least, Councillor Steve Criswell after that. So David, over to you first.
Thanks, Councillor MacDonald. Hopefully you can all hear me okay.
Yes, thank you.
Great stuff. So this paper outlines the road safety schemes that we're proposing for 2021-2022. In section 1.2 of the paper, there's a description about how sites are identified and prioritised. It's essentially based on the most recent 3-year calendar period in terms of accidents, and those accidents are investigated to understand which schemes present the greatest risks. Now, the road safety budget is currently £594,000 per annum, and this covers the design and investigation of schemes as well as the implementation of those schemes. It is required and common for us to carry funding over into future years to ensure that we can deliver the schemes, and indeed this is the approach taken here. The 2021-22 budget's mostly allocated to the Swatham Heath road scheme. Land purchase is ongoing on that scheme, and we are looking to progress towards delivery on that one. So Swatham Heath Road, which is a delivery of a staggered junction at this accident cluster site, is progressing through to delivery with design substantially completed. The paper also refers to Puddock Road, another scheme, and as set out in 2.4 of the report, we're looking at outline options for that location, but survey work is required to determine whether or not it's appropriate to sever that route. Until that survey work is complete, and that survey work was delayed due to the pandemic, we'll take a view on that scheme in due course. Section 2.5 of the report refers to the Sheath Crossroads, which is the second scheme on the programme that we are recommending to take forward. This is an important accident cluster site where there have been a range of collisions, 20 collisions between January 2015 and December 2020, including 2 fatal and 2 serious injury collisions more recently. Initially, a traffic light signal scheme was proposed at this location to deal with this impact, utilising community infrastructure levy funding with proposals developed with Huntingdonshire District Council to deliver a traffic light scheme. Now, the SIL report at that time did identify that other options were being explored in parallel, albeit the funding was for a traffic signal scheme there. As we have explored the detail of the project in line with the usual approach of understanding site constraints in more detail and costs in more detail, it's emerged that the traffic signal scheme originally envisaged could not be delivered within the footprint of the junction, and therefore land purchase is required from multiple landowners, and we're also required to negotiate fibre optic cable there. In spring this year, Milestone, our advisors, produced an option assessment report. That report looks at a roundabout versus a signalised junction versus a staggered crossroads, and the paper, particularly Appendix D, provides some of the outcomes of that. In essence, when we're looking at accidents, we look at the cost, delay, and accident savings of the options to derive a benefit cost ratio. And what the technical work tells us is that the staggered crossroad option presents a greater business case than traffic signals, and therefore we are recommending that we progress with that scheme. Indeed, if we did choose to progress with that scheme, we'd have to continue discussions with Huntingdonshire District Council about funding, and we'd also need to liaise with other potential funders to help deliver the full cost of works. It's fair to say that the original assumptions last year on costs have increased quite significantly for a number of reasons. Finally, the paper talks about the A10 and highlights that we recognise the safety challenges on this corridor. Work is being carried out by the combined authority to look at the corridor and its challenges more generally. We have implemented some speed reduction works, and as touched on earlier in the committee, we're working with Urban and Civic, the developer, to look at what measures can be accelerated and implemented at the Denny End Junction there. So the recommendation of the board is to approve the road safety schemes for 2021 and 22, and there's a particular request to steer the way forward on the Sheath Crossroads, for which the recommendation is to advance detailed design and explore funding options to drive forward a staggered crossroads.
Okay, David, thank you. I'm sure there'll be questions from members. So first of all, we just move to the statement from the Milton Cycling Campaign and then to Mrs. Margaret Lum.
Thank you, Chair. The section on the A10 between Cardyke Junction and Milton has recently been downgraded to 40 miles an hour. But it has been observed by many nearby residents that many vehicles are not adhering to this new speed limit, with dangerous overtakes being reported. This behaviour increases the perceived risk on this road and depresses cycling and walking numbers. We believe that the following measures should be considered on the A10, in particular the highlighted section below and the new 40 mile an hour section. Road width is currently that of a 60 mile an hour road. Its width should be reduced to reflect the width of a 40 mile an hour speed road. Lack of consistency with nearby minor roads, for example, A10 is 40 miles an hour in vehicles leaving the road to Ely Road, and that road being 50 mile an hour, and a similar picture on Butts Lane, with that road being narrower and faster at 60 miles an hour. It is important to highlight that both these roads have adjacent shared pavements which no longer meet LTN 120 standards and are poorly maintained, in particular the Butt Lane path. For this reason, we suggest that the highlighted roads should have their speed limit downgraded to 40 miles an hour for pedestrian and cyclist safety. Traffic lights should be installed at the Humphreys Way Land Beach Road junction to help people cross the road safely from Land Beach to Milton and vice versa, and they should help reduce speeds. Speed cameras should be installed, and speed limits lowered to 40 miles an hour along Butt Lane until Impington, Ely Road, Milton, and A10 from Butt Lane traffic lights to new 40 mile an hour speed limits. It's important to note that the highlighted sections in the pictures have seen 47 collisions between 2005 to 2019, leading to injury of various degrees and death of a pedestrian, according to Stats 19 data.
Thank you, Dan. We will, of course, send a full response to Milton. David, do you want to make any commentary at this stage?
We'll provide a full technical response on that. At this stage, I would say that we are working with the developer Urban and Civic as part of their planning mitigation to improve the pedestrian and cyclist connectivity, both on the A10 and in the vicinity through the provision of alternative links and crossing points. Road speeds is a tricky one in that the speed on the sign has to equate to the speed that vehicles will realistically travel and the features of the highway. So apologies for if this is already understood, but it's not appropriate for us to simply just put up a speed sign and expect that will fix the problem. So I think the best way I can advance this is take the helpful technical suggestions away and investigate them in more detail and provide a worked up response about what is possible.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So I'd now like to welcome Mrs. Margaret Lum, Chairman of St Ives Area Road Safety Committee, to speak on the item road safety. Mrs. Lum, thanks for joining us. And ideally, you have 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak today, as I've been involved in campaigning for safety measures at Sheath, the Crossroads, for a number of years. The Road Safety Committee meets alternate months, and we are actually having our first face-to-face meeting next week. This location is on the agenda at every meeting. We have a watching brief of items because it is considered one of the most important junctions in the St Ives area because there are so many minor bumps which are not reported because the police aren't involved, but only reported locally by residents who see them. I am one of the residents who will not use this crossroads because I consider it so dangerous. It's a 60-mile-an-hour road. We've only got giveaway signs, which a lot of motorists going across to Woodhurst or coming from Woodhurst completely ignore. There are reports weekly of other motorists seeing this happen. And we were absolutely delighted when we were told the money had been allocated for traffic lights, ring-fenced, and now we, having canvassed a lot of opinion, everyone is horrified that it's going to be a staggered junction because we had discussed this and discounted it. Because people will have to wait in the middle of a 60-mile-an-hour road unless it's widened to incorporate a special turning lane. I know a lot of accidents are driver error, which the police have told us, which I accept, but you'll always get that wherever you are. We would like lighting at that junction because it's very dark and it gets quite misty in the winter. And then no one knows whether they turn right or left. When I learned to drive, you went behind the car, but people don't do that now. And the limit is 60 miles on that road. We have campaigned to bring it down, and we have been told, no, that won't happen. So we want something done. Traffic lights worked very well when there were pipe work up there. A staggered junction, depending on where it is, it would be more dangerous if it goes nearer the Envar gate, which is on the 1050. We got the Envar gate in the Heath Road, Blanchisham, closed because we just found that was dangerous, and they only use it for emergencies now. But as an interim, stop signs and lighting would help, but no, there's no criteria for that apparently. But I would like to plead with you not to put finance before lives in this instance. We do not want any more fatalities. The driver involved in the minibus crash, which killed 3 and injured 18, is coming up for trial in November. And we have been asked by the coroner, the Road Safety Committee, to compile a list of accident statistics by him, which we are in the process of finalising now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very valuable input. Please stay with us, obviously, for the debate. I'd now like to invite Councillor Steve Criswell to speak to us. And Steve, I think the rules say 5 minutes, so as close as you can get to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good morning, members. This is Sheath Crossroads is the item I'd like to speak on, Chairman, and it's a very emotive subject locally. Sheath Crossroads is only about 3 miles from where we're sitting at the moment, and as we've heard, it's been the site of many accidents. It's been a burden on my mailbag and my conscience for many years, and far more importantly, it's been the scene of loss of life on far too many occasions. So really, I was really pleased when we managed to get it on the options appraisal work that we did in March 2019. And at that time, traffic lights was clearly the preferred option. And actually throughout quite a few conversations and meetings since, traffic lights remained the preferred option. Funding obviously was always going to be difficult. It was certainly a huge priority for the previous administration. And we approached HDC for some SIL funding because obviously growth was one of the issues causing, I think, inappropriate gap acceptance is the term, where gaps in traffic were becoming less and less and people were taking greater risks. And this early this year, we were putting a bid into HDC for SIL funding. And we agreed with HDC that we wouldn't put that bid in until we had settled on a scheme and the administration had guaranteed they would find the rest of the funding, and that was done, and that was the situation early this year. Prior to the bid going into HDC, it was due to go in March. Officers already had sight of the milestone report that's referred to, so we did have that report as far back as March. And they did convene a meeting with the previous chair of Highways Committee and myself as the local member, and said that milestone report was starting to show that staggered junctions would provide better value. Did we wish to change tack or continue with the process as was already underway with traffic lights? And the conversation that was had with the senior officers at the time was based solely on road safety. And I said, what is the problem we are trying to solve? And Appendix D in our report today shows the pros and cons. I haven't got a page number, Chairman, it's not on there, I'm afraid. Appendix D shows the pros and cons of a staggered crossroads and signals. And the cons for a staggered crossroads, the first two says does not improve opportunities to exit the junction, and drivers must still rely on their own judgment. And they were the very two items that we were trying to solve. So we were confronted with, we could go to staggered crossroads, it might be better value, but the very two issues we're trying to solve were the disadvantages with the staggered crossroads. So that decision for me, Chairman, was very easy. I think staggered crossroads has been seen by the public as something to placate the public rather than solve the problem. And it certainly wasn't good enough for me. It wasn't good enough for the previous administration, and I desperately hope it's not good enough for this committee, Chairman. This is a junction we need to solve once and for all. And traffic lights is the only solution that requires drivers to stop. And that is the basic problem. No other options require drivers to stop. I understand the methodology for the cost-benefit analysis, but I'm afraid I cannot justify saying we will go for staggered junctions so it saves 2 minutes on someone's journey to work when actually we're trying to save lives. So for that reason, Chairman, I am asking the committee to go with the original traffic light option. Let's find the money, let's do it, let's honour the agreement we had with HDC to provide that SIL funding for traffic lights. I don't believe going to a staggered junction will solve the problem. It could be the worst of all worlds, Chairman, if we spend £2 million on a staggered junction and we still have accidents there. So my plea is to members just to bear that in mind and stick to the original traffic light option, please, Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Criswell. David, do you want to comment at this stage or wait for later in the debate?
Well, if I may comment at this stage, I might just touch on a few points raised if it's helpful.
Yes, please do.
Thanks to both speakers for really interesting points. I think I'd just echo, this is not just an issue that is of prime importance to St Ives, it's of top importance to Cambridgeshire. This appears on the accident cluster list right up there at the top, and we're all certainly highly motivated to put in a solution there. Now, what we need to do is make sure that the solution is the right solution, the most appropriate one, and the methodology that we use to do that is the industry standard approach that does take into account delay and cost, but also the propensity to be effective in reducing collisions and saving lives. It's true that one of the negative points of a staggered crossroads is that a driver has to rely upon their own judgment, but as the evidence suggests, the nature of the highway feature massively increases the ability of the driver to trust their judgment, because the maneuver that has to be undertaken is far less complex. The cognitive load is much less complex. There are pros and cons associated with traffic signals and staggered crossroads, so both have pros and cons, but we have to be guided by the evidence, and the evidence suggests that when you look at the overall benefits, the staggered crossroads has a greater impact in terms of reducing collisions and the higher benefit cost ratio. I would also note that one of the reasons that delay is also important is that when drivers are delayed, that can also impede their ability to make sensible decisions, and we find that risk taking is associated with congestion delay as well. So I think that covers it for now, but I just wanted to point out that this is not at all about looking for the cheapest option or compromising anything. It's about trying to identify the solution that will have the greatest positive impact using the method that we have rely on across the country to determine the most appropriate investments.
Thanks, David. If I may, I'll come to Councillor Smith. I just have two quick questions myself. As Councillor Criswell pointed out, I must admit it did jump out of the page to me when it said for the staggered junction, one of the cons was does not improve opportunities to exit the junction. That did jump out of the page as a disadvantage, and also that the driver has to, of course, make two turns to cross the junction on that busy road. David, is there anything you, before I move to Councillor Smith in the debate, anything you want to say on those particular cons, those disadvantages?
Simply that they are objective disadvantages of that particular solution. Traffic signals also has disadvantages. I think we have to recognise that we are looking at a crossroads here where we have conflicting movements, and in all cases that comes with an element of risk. So I would just emphasise that yes, where you have traffic lights, for example, there is a risk of red light blindness where people approach quickly and have a tendency to overshoot, which can be equally dangerous. But the pros and cons that we refer to in the appendix are objective pros and cons. We've fed those into the analysis that leads to the overarching business case conclusion.
All right, thanks, David. So I have Councillor Mandy Smith, Councillor Sanderson, Councillor Janet French, Councillor Brian Milnes, and Councillor Ryan Fuller. I think in that order, and Councillor Douglas Dew. I think I've got the order correct. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, welcome to David Allett to his new position. We've emailed quite a few times. It's the first time we've sort of seen, so welcome to your new post. Right, basically, a lot of things here. I mean, I travel that road. I know that road quite well. I don't think the scene has been set really, because there's quite a lot happening in that, and it alerted me when the first speaker, there's quite a lot happening in that area, isn't there? And the local member will be able to sort of say that. You've got a business right on the junction, you've got a few gateways nearby, and then as you come in from St Ives to and then you have to stop and turn right at the junction now, you turn down to one of the county council recycling centres, yeah? Which is well used by basically people who are not used to the area. So I just thought the scene ought to be set that it's not just a crossroads in the middle of the country, it is well used. And also, if I remember rightly, again, the local member will know, basically the road is quite sort of dippy, isn't it? It's not just straight from Heath, St Ives to Bluntisham, for example. There is some dips. So I do think the traffic lights making people stop would be the best scenario, because Stagger Junction, you've got a lot going on there. People need to just stop.
Okay. Thank you. I think over to Councillor Sanderson, then Councillor Janet French.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Steve as a local member and Mrs. Lund for their comments. From what you were saying, Steve, it seemed to be you obviously had a site meeting after this first happened, and lights were then the preferred option. So I'm not sure at what point traffic lights were put to one side, and this idea of a staggered junction then seemed to be highlighted, seemed to be the preferred option here, because it's obviously not the preferred option for the local community. And I think that's vital that we get the village and local members on board, and also our colleagues at the district council who are putting a lot of funding into this project. All of them appear to have recognised that something needs to happen here. And it did bring it home to me when the coroner, I think it's in the report, coroner said that we as the highway authority are, I think it's phrased as an interested party. So as part of the inquest, they clearly recognise themselves that something needs to happen here. So I wonder if we could have some clarity on that. Thank you.
I'll go back to David in a second, if that's okay, and then go to Councillor French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think looking at the report, it's quite staggering, the fatalities, injuries, etc. I wonder what we're doing as an authority. Are we going for best value, cheapest way out? Are we going for safety to save lives? And I think saving lives is paramount. We had this in Finland. We have 3 sets of smart lights on the 141 Goose Tree, where a young lady was sadly killed. We have Gull Road, where numerous, certainly 2 or 3 fatalities and numerous serious injuries. And then we have the traffic lights at Wimbledon. Now, Peace Hill, from Peace Hill roundabout to Mill Hill, that is a 60 miles an hour. And it works exceptionally well. People realise it gives enough time when the traffic lights change colour, so there is no, sort of slamming on your brakes, etc. The Wimbledon, that is a 50. That works well. And Goose Tree, obviously, Goose Tree has had over the years numerous. Since all these lights have gone in, very, very few accidents or RTCs have occurred. I just wonder, looking and listening, I just wonder if you're going to go down the line of staggered, all you're doing is sticking a plaster on it. You're not solving the problems. So if somebody is going to be 2 or 3 minutes late, so what? If that saves somebody's lives, I would fully support traffic lights.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it was Councillor Milnes, then Ryan, Councillor Fuller and Councillor Dew.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to ask Dave Allett about the assessments done by Milestone. So if we refer to properly configured MOVA controlled lights, which Councillor French just referred to as successful interventions, and I've got an example at the top of the bypass in Sawston in my division, which was an accident cluster spot similarly. And since the traffic lights were installed there, which are very well configured to cope with the flow, so most of the time the main road will get the priority, and the adjoining roads will get the opportunity when they approach, and it works remarkably well. So we've got an issue where fundamentally traffic lights are ideal for a situation where we've got a main thoroughfare with adjoining roads into the junction. So I don't really understand why Milestone have come up with this collision reduction benefit, and is that a cost benefit analysis thing, or is it really saying that a staggered junction would be better at reducing collisions? And I see Dave nodding his head, and I still don't quite understand why that's the case.
Thank you, and I'll David, I'll come to you in a second. Councillor Fuller and then Councillor Dew.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm quite clear on this in that I think we can talk about things like industry standards and all these different ways of measuring things. But ultimately, in this country, we don't have government by technocrat. And I don't mean any offence to our officers by that, but the sole purpose, well, the main purpose of local democracy and local representation is that we have local knowledge that we can input into things like this. Now, you've heard from Councillor Criswell as the local member. We've got Mrs. Lum, who's made very valid points, very knowledgeable about the subject. Members have checked their inbox. Late this morning, we've had an email from Somersham Town Council that Dan circulated, also making very similar points. We should listen to those people, Chairman. And I hope you'd also listen to me, because I'm the neighbouring member. My division ends, actually, it incorporates most of Somersham Road up to this Crossroads, and it stops about 100 yards short. So Councillor Criswell and I have worked closely on this together. And that's why, with my other hat on as leader of HDC, I was delighted to champion this through the district council to take the unusual step of going and getting £500,000 contribution. Because although this features, I think, about number 9 or number 10 on the county's accident hotspot list, this is the number 1 accident hotspot in the entirety of Huntingdonshire. That's why we've worked together to try and do something about this, and why the district councillor stepped forward with this funding. Now, as leader of HDC, I'm not going to say we're going to take that funding away if it's not traffic lights, but clearly that decision was made based on that option that was presented at the time as being the most sensible one. I'm not going to get into how we've managed to go from 1.2 million to 2.8 million, and we're still on a paper project here, because, you know, knowing county projects as I do, we're going to end up much higher than that by the time it's finished, I'm sure. But we do need to acknowledge what local people understand about this junction and what local people are saying. And there is a very clear consensus that a staggered junction just will not solve it. And I think sticking plaster is the best way of putting it, as a colleague said before. If we spend nearly £2 million on delivering a staggered junction that everyone locally is saying to you will not work, it will not solve this problem, and heaven forbid there's then an accident, you know, that will weigh on the conscience of all of us, I would hope, frankly. And I will conclude by repeating the very relevant point that Mrs. Lum said. We've got to put lives before money here, and I would hope that the committee will consider that. And we shouldn't be looking at benefit cost ratios and looking at the funding and things. We need to find a solution that's going to work. And I appreciate Mr. Allett's of the view, and the milestone report is of the view, that a staggered junction is better. It just cannot be. You know, this is a time when I have to disagree with our officers, and we have to be realistic about this. That con in there that Councillor Criswell referred to, that it doesn't affect people moving into the junction. And as Councillor Smith has said, I think it was, moving people into the middle of that junction on a 60-mile-an-hour road with a staggered junction, it's madness. So there are times where we have to accept the expert advice, look at it and say, well, that's all very good, and that's probably right on paper, but actually local knowledge here has to trump that. And what you have, Chairman and colleagues, is a very strong local response across the board saying a staggered junction is not the right solution. Please, can we have traffic lights as we were promised, as we agreed previously, and as I'm afraid think we must now get on and deliver.
Okay, thank you very much. Valuable inputs. Councillor Dew.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm going to follow on a similar tack there, being a local member, and would refer members to the site and its situation. If you look at it as a staggered junction, what you've got to take into account there is the fact that, as Councillor Smith, I think it was, who raised the fact that it's on the top of a rise, so it drops away both sides. And I think one of the reasons why people misjudge coming out is they look, and because the vehicles are just dipped below the hill, by the time they've come over at doing 60, they're already on top of them. So I think the staggered junction, all that will do, will move the position where people, instead of coming out and being in the middle of the road to go across, they will then turn right or left to be in the middle of the road, still with people coming fast at them. So I think all we'll do is create another accident cluster 100 yards up the road. I think the other thing to be taken into account on that particular argument is the speed of the vehicles that come up the road there. And if we go back historically further than the 5 years, which we've done on the current thing to show the accident clusters and deaths and injuries on the site, there was quite a few fatal injuries on that site prior to that as well, including some I can recall when my children were at school with some of their friends who were actually killed quite innocently driving up there one evening, and there was 3 young people killed there. As a result of that, it was identified that speed was a problem on the main road, and hence the speed light that's up there, the traffic light monitor rather, was installed. So I don't think we're getting away from the fact that, you know, speed is still a problem there and will continue to be. It's been quite rightly mentioned that there's lots of businesses, and the recycling centre is greatly used, and that's the case. So I think, you know, it is without doubt that, you know, local people have looked at it for a long while and wanted something done. The traffic lights seems the right solution, especially taking into account that the road is level on the two minor roads, so you can see for a long while across those. Where you can't see is on the bit where people are travelling at 60 and where you have to give way. And if you don't actually stop that by putting a staggered junction in, you may save on the cost of actually doing a project. But I think, as Councillor Fuller's already raised, we then have to explain to people why we've spent £2 million and actually reduced no accidents or injuries or deaths at all. And I for one would hold my head in shame if we did that. And I fully support the fact that we should have a roundabout. Thank you.
David, I think before I try and sum up.
Traffic lights, Chairman. My apologies.
Yeah, I was going to correct you, and then I thought I know what you were meaning. David, would you like to come back and make some commentary, and then I'm going to, unless there's other member inputs, I'm going to try and sum up.
Yeah, and I would perhaps also, if it's okay, Chair, invite the Vision Zero Partnership Manager just to cover anything I may have missed, if that's okay. But I'll firstly just cover on, look, much like any aspects of any project or planning process, I think it's very important that we are evidence-led. What that means is that it acknowledges the fact that any subjective view can then be quantified, understood, and examined. And it's very good practice on any project of any kind to continue asking the question of, is this project going to deliver the greatest possible benefit? Now, there's been reference to the term sticking plaster a few times. I really want to express that none of this technical work was informed by any sort of cost-cutting exercise or any sort of sticking plaster. The key question asked is which solution will deliver the greatest casualty reduction, and to inform that, yes, we did use industry standard practice, much like a planning application would have to be assessed against industry standard tools to convert the abstract and the subjective into something that's qualified and objective. Yes, it was originally identified that traffic signals would be appropriate solution here, in line with standard process as things move along, mindful of the constraints on the corridor, mindful of what we're all trying to achieve. An options assessment was carried out, and that option assessment has pointed us in a different direction. And I have to be guided for that in shaping my recommendation, because like yourselves, I have a conscience on this, and I want to make sure I'm putting forward the correct recommendation. Could I hand over to Matt Staton, who's had historic involvement on this site before my joining, just to make sure that I've picked up on everything and there's nothing else to add?
That's fine. Yes, go ahead, Matt.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much, David. Yeah, obviously, a lot of you know that I was in the role of Highway Projects and Road Safety Manager during the first part of this project. So to bring that background to this, the initial options assessment report did indicate that that signals could be delivered in line as a cost-effective solution, which I know Councillor Criswell alluded to in what he was saying, and that was my decision at the time to progress that as the option, as it was at that time indicated as the cheapest option, but also as having no land take being a key part in that, allowing it to be delivered quickly. As part of that process, it was quickly identified that land take would be required in any solution going forwards, which brought the other options into play, which is why the detailed options assessment David's outlined was undertaken alongside the process, the funding allocation process that Councillor Criswell has identified, and work with Hunts District Council on the SEAL funding. So that is the background as to why the options were all brought back into play, and I know that was one of the questions that was asked earlier on. I think it's important from the specific road safety expertise element to identify that we do have traffic light junctions in the county that do have a significant number of collisions. Denny End Junction, which David mentioned on the A10, is a traffic light controlled junction and has had 12 slight injury collisions and 3 serious injury collisions in the last 5 years, and is currently on the cluster site list. So signals requiring people to stop is not a silver bullet in terms of reducing collisions. We know from the evidence that introducing signals also introduces rear end shunt collisions, and you can expect to see those increase at the location where signals are installed. So it's a very careful balance in looking at those options as to where the benefits and where the potential costs and risks introduced by each option do come into play. The key thing with the staggered junction approach is that it massively reduces the number of conflict points and massively reduces the complexity of the decision making that a driver needs to make at the location, making it into 2 T-junctions, and that has well recognised evidence in reducing the number of collisions, and that evidence does suggest that the collision reduction by doing that is very similar to that of signals, by which the staggered junction actually has a greater casualty reduction saving than the signals, very slightly, and therefore bringing in the other pros and cons into place, and the cost benefit analysis is where the distinction between the 2 schemes comes in.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So I'm going to try and do the difficult job of summing up. I mean, first of all, from all the work that I've seen that David and Matt and other officers have done, it never really crossed my desk that cost was really the issue. They've approached it in terms of the effectiveness of the solution. And I do take Councillor Fuller's point that, maybe that is a very technical approach without that local knowledge that Mrs. Lum and Councillor Steve have presented to us. So I think the officer work is correct. The process has been correct. However, it is our role as members to, and that's why we're sitting here, to apply our knowledge and our judgment as well. I think I'm not hearing at the moment great support, unless somebody wants to correct me, for the staggered solution to this issue. The point was made by a number of members that whilst the traffic light solution is not a panacea, none of these solutions are a panacea, it may stand more chance of bringing the benefits and the reduction in incidents that we're looking for. That's the feeling I get in the room. At the end of the day, there would almost certainly be 2 factors to consider in a traffic light solution. One is because of the land take mentioned by David and Matt, it will take probably a bit longer. And so the community would need to understand that, because there's a longer process to go through. And potentially, and this is where costs may come into it, some significant extra cost, because as I understand it, the fibre optic work that has to be done. So I'm going to look at Councillor Fuller and say the County Council may come back to Hunts with the begging bowl, and I know that he can't, it's not appropriate, and I'm not going to ask him to say yes or no to whether he could provide additional funding. But I think I'm hearing from members that the traffic light solution is what members would overall support. Does anybody wish to say anything else? Do you want to put it to a vote, or can we do that by affirmation?
I think it should go to a vote. Proper proposal.
So maybe for due process, Dan, we should put it to a vote.
I'm happy to propose.
Okay, thanks, Councillor French. Will somebody second that? Councillor Smith. Okay. Yeah, please.
Okay, members. So all those in favour of a traffic light solution for the Sheath Crossroads, please raise your hands. That's unanimous, Chair.
You were just kidding me, weren't you, when you said you wanted to vote instead of do by affirmation? Okay, look, I'd like to thank the officer input. As I said, I meant what I said, which has been excellent. I think it's a very good discussion and debate. And I'm confident we've reached the right answer. And I'm going to get my begging bowl from the car to go and see Councillor Fuller afterwards. Thank you, Councillor Criswell. I'm going to propose that we two options, which is we take a 5-minute break now. We're broadly on time, or we do civil parking enforcement and then take a 5-minute break, but it will be a 5-minute break. Okay, let's do civil parking enforcement, then take a 5-minute break. Thank you. So move to item 7, which is civil parking enforcement. And can I please ask Sonia, Traffic Manager, to present the report, please?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. We currently have civil parking enforcement in Cambridge City. Elsewhere in the county, parking is enforced by the police. This paper sets out the background to civil parking enforcement and the current position with the 3 districts who wish to progress civil parking enforcement applications to the Secretary of State, these being South Cambridgeshire, Fenland and Huntingdonshire. Each arrangement is slightly different, and we'll need to set up agency agreements for each district with the partners to set out the working arrangements and to minimise our risks. The paper explains the background, issues and risks, and the process to implementation of CPE and sets out an indicative timetable. The powers and responsibilities of CPE are set out in a link in paragraph 1.12. Does not include pavement parking, as we're currently awaiting further announcements from DFT, Department for Transport, on how this can be implemented. The risks are set out in 2.14. We're seeking approval to prepare applications to DFT with the partners and delegate the approval of the agency agreements. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Okay, so before we move to the debate, are specific questions for Sonia at the moment with regard to this? Councillor Milnes.
Yes, I'd just like some clarification over the timing and requirements of the agency agreements. One of the issues that we have is that whereas other districts have got funding in place, South Cambs haven't yet got longer term funding arranged. I believe there's about a year requirement for agency agreements to be put in place. So I just want to understand that process and the requirements as presented in the report, please.
Okay, well, that's something that will need to be worked out with partners with GCP and South Cambs. I mean, we've got an indicative timetable in 2.25, which says we'll be drafting agency agreements over the next few months. But clearly, if we can't come to an agreement, it may take a bit longer than set out. So.
Yeah, so what I'm thinking about, Sonia, is that we're going to put an application to the Secretary of State, I think, is the process. And when we put that application in place, and the agency agreements have to be in place.
Well, we have to have them in place to minimise our risks. I don't think it's a technical requirement of the Secretary of State, but it would be sensible for us as an authority to have that in place before we put the application in.
So I think it's Councillor King, then Councillor French, then Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I just wanted to say, from a fandom point of view, we owe a huge debt of thanks to Councillor French, who has been an unstinting supporter of CPE in Fenland. And obviously this is going to require some financial commitment from Finland. My question for you, Sonia, is about the villages, because one of the common aspects of inconsiderate and illegal parking is in front of schools. So will the enforcement also apply to villages as well as the towns?
Yes. So a slightly fuller answer would be, we would be looking to cover the whole district. And obviously there would need to be some order in place that the officers could enforce, but yes, it would cover villages. However, I think it's fair to say that there's not going to be limitless supply of enforcement officers to cover every village all of the time, and it would be some sort of targeting, and if there are particular issues, then schedules could be set to target those issues. So
I was anticipating that answer, Chair, and I'm glad it was the one I was anticipating. Thank you.
Well done. Councillor French and Fuller, I think I missed Councillor Murphy. Go ahead, Councillor French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is obviously music to my ears. I've been working on this since 2019. We did have to stop in 2020 because we discovered it was going to be very expensive and we had no money. We were very fortunate. The combined authority at the time was Mayor Palmer. He had given all the towns £1 million for the projects. I went cap in hand to the 4 towns and they very kindly gave me £100,000 out of the £1 million, which was absolutely wonderful. It is going to be expensive. There's a lot of work got to be done. Every sign, every line has got to be checked, and it will cost a considerable amount of money. But as I say, we have been working on this. We have the consultant that we have been working with off and on since 2019, and he's done a load of work. Having spoken to the police over the last 4 years, not just 2 years, we understand that the police do not have the resources, they don't have the time, and especially with the pandemic, it's impossible for to do any work. And one thing that was highlighted by the police, which is, this is coming out of the report at FDC, however, certain exclusions may have to be made to the simple definition. The police have the views on areas where they would wish to see the regulations remain under the control of Cambridge Police, and have given an initial indication that they would wish to retain this responsibility for only the motorway network. Well, I got quite excited there because we haven't got a motorway. So anyway, that's the joke. Yes, we have been working on this. One of the concerns that we had when the consultant came back and said the possible cost of 45 to 75,000 deficit each year. When we looked further into this and we worked out what figures he was using figures that he had retained, actually got from the police. In 2017, the police issued 445 tickets across the whole of Finland. Now, Finland's quite a big place. It's got 4 towns. Last year, we did ask the police, could they do a purge? They did a couple of days and then went back and did another couple of days. Well, the first day was 42 tickets given. The next day was 35 and the similar, and that was only Wisbech, not the other towns. It is in the report. March does have a enforcement, but we only have it on one car park, and that is March Marketplace. And the reason we have that is to allow traffic flow and shoppers, because we were getting shop workers, etc., parking there all day. Yeah, we only had 74, but that's only done on an ad hoc. We know that we will fund any deficit. I don't believe there will be much of a deficit. I think the first probably 6 to 12 months, we will send out a lot of tickets. But I think after it calms down, people will realise that we are serious about the irresponsible parking. Pavement parking obviously is one thing that I'm very concerned about, and I would love to know as and when the authority does get information on that. I believe it's only London that can actually serve notices on pavement parking. Certainly in March alone, it's horrendous. So we would welcome that. So I would fully support that. My only concern, we can only submit an application twice a year, October and April. And I cannot understand why you're proposing to submit this application over a year ago, October 22. Why can it not be submitted in April? So, but I fully support this.
Okay, thanks. I'll come back to Sonia on that question in a second. Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Chair. I initiated this at HDC, so it will come as no surprise that I'm quite supportive of this, and I'm really pleased it's here today for us to progress at a county level. My questions for Sonia, if I may, actually relate to paragraphs 2.4 and 2.5, and primarily the references to South Cambs. So I absolutely understand the process that HDC and Fenland have followed and are following in this. It's slightly different, it seems, in South Cambs because the GCP has stepped forward and is going to provide some funding for that. But could we just have clarity on the reference in 2.4, please, Sonia? Can you hear me okay? Sorry, I'm sort of speaking in the side of the microphone. The reference in 2.4 to the time-limited element of that funding from GCP, and there's a reference then to CCC introducing on-street parking charges in South Cambs to reduce any revenue shortfall. I mean, my understanding would be, as the County Council currently does in other areas, such as Huntingdonshire, where it has on-street parking, that revenue remains with the County Council. So that sort of indicates to me that the county might in the future be subsidising CPE in South Cambs. So I'd just like to understand that distinction, because that's not being proposed to happen in Fenland or Huntingdonshire. And then it's a similar point in 2.5, where HDC and FDC are going to be commissioning their own survey work, as agreed with the County Council. But for some reason in South Cambs, it says CCC will need to initiate this review in consultation with South Cambs and the GCP. So again, could we just have clarity that we're operating on an even keel here, that all three districts are approaching this in the same way? Because my view on this would be, is, you know, it's wonderful the GCP are going to fund this in South Cambs, but that's really an arrangement between the GCP and South Cambs. I don't see why the GCP would be involved in the County Council's work here. You know, no more so than if I go out and find someone very generous to fund the work in Huntingdonshire, that would be between me at HDC and them, rather than involving the County Council.
So, Sonia, perhaps you pick up those points from Councillor Fuller and Councillor French.
And Chair, if I could contribute.
Do you want me to go first? Yeah. Okay, so Councillor French, in relation to why not April 22. I mean, it's an indicative timetable. If we get to a stage where we can submit an application sooner, then obviously we would. But you know, I think it was just being realistic with quite a lot of work to go through and how long each stage. We've been working up sort of draft project plan, but you know.
Okay, fine. It's just we're itching. We're ready to go.
I know. Regarding the differences between the district, as I said in my introduction, each area is slightly different and funding's coming from different areas, and South Cambs district haven't agreed to put money in, which Huntingdonshire have, and so GCP are stepping in. It's not clear yet how long that period of time would be for, and therefore if there's an ongoing deficit, then we would need to find funding from elsewhere. And one option could be parking charges. So it would have to be a way of, you know, there's different ways to get funding. But yeah, I can't give you an absolute clear answer, but Councillor Mills might like to.
Councillor Murphy's been patiently waiting. Do you mind if Brian addresses that?
Yeah, thank you. So we've got a historical issue with parking in South Cambs, which is there was no on-street or off-street charging at all. Unlike other districts like Huntingdonshire, I think this is the second application. The first one was refused a few years ago. Okay, you're shaking your head, so I misunderstood that. But there used to be a requirement for no taxation contributions to the cost of parking, and that's now changed. But we would have to get any revenue at all, we would have to introduce some charging schemes. And the only place we could do that is on street, because we don't have any off-street locations. So the situation with the GCP is they've offered to fund the preparatory work and to do an indeterminate funding for a while. That's not been decided as a point in time, and after that the district would have to be able to subsidise the losses likely to incur. One of the things that we want to do in South Cambs particularly is we want a light touch. We don't want a huge amount of activity because we believe, and the previous, when the police previously used to do the enforcement, it didn't require a lot of work because that quelled the amount of inconsiderate and illegal parking that was taking place. Since the police stopped doing enforcement almost at all about 3 years ago, the amount of illegal parking, of course, has boomed because people know that there is no enforcement being taken. And so what we're hoping for, I think, particularly in South Cambs, is that because of the proximity to the city and the enforcement officers there, we can effectively see occasional movements out from the city enforcement system, with perhaps some more operatives able to be added, and therefore keep the cost of the enforcement scheme relatively low.
Thank you. So Councillor Murphy and then Councillor Sharp.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a really helpful report, and I'm interested in the period between now and the submission date in October 22. I'm really just trying to get a handle, following on slightly from what Councillor Milnes was saying earlier about risks. Is there a point between now and the submission date when we have a sort of clearer view of the financial model and associated risks with taking on a scheme? And is there also a point at which we start to commit resources in earnest in pursuing this? I wonder if there are points between now and October when, in a year's time, when we will be able to perhaps revisit with the updated information, which I think would be very helpful to know. So
maybe Sonia, if you take that now, and then I'll go to Councillor Sharp, then Councillor Sanderson.
Well, as I said, each district slightly different and at slightly different stages. So the South Cambs work hasn't been, we haven't got the financial information from South Cambs, but in the report there's some more detail about Fenland and Huntingdonshire. So yes, there would be stages during that process where we'd have more clear information.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp, then Councillor Sanderson, Councillor French, and then try and bring it to a close.
Thank you, Chairman. 2 points, really. One, I think all colleagues have got an aim to reduce the level of antisocial parking that is, sort of prevalent around not just the county, but obviously around the country. But so I wish colleagues well with achieving that aim. I just wanted to touch on what East Cambs are doing. We're working on a scheme which is basically a community-based enforcement and speeding, antisocial and illegal parking enforcement under Section 38 of the Police and Crime Act 2017. And that's going to one of our committees. The latest update's going to one of our committees next Monday, and we're then looking at reviewing it in a year's time. Because we've got free parking within the towns within, obviously the major town or city as it is Ely. There is free parking in Ely because we want to encourage residents and visitors into the city and to use the shop, to use the facilities. That's our sort of raison d'etre. So that was our concern, was that we didn't want to have to accept car parking charge. So that's really where East Cams are at. The only other comment I've got, and Councillor Fuller touched on it, so I won't, is I have got concerns about, and I've not really got the answer from the officer that I would can understand, is in terms of South Cams and how this funding with the County Council and the GCP is going to happen, because I thought each of the districts had to stand on their own 2 feet rather than it being a subsidy from other areas. But obviously it's something we can take offline. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson, then Councillor French.
Thank you, Chair. I warmly welcome this. I've been banging on about this for many years at HDC, so Councillor Fuller will be relieved that he won't have to hear me moaning anymore about it. I think, very good. Couple of points of clarification, though. If I just ask Sonia, firstly, if obviously all the TROs will have to be checked, signage, lining, etc., to make sure they're legal. But if a TRO is found not to have legal status, would it be the responsibility of the county to put that right, and the districts would then have to pay them to do it? And my second question is, I understand the revenue, if there is any surplus from the fines, central government takes some of that back. Is that correct, or have I got that point wrong?
Okay, so regarding the TROs, yes, with the Higher Rail Authority, and so it be our responsibility to process new traffic regulation orders if required. Regarding the surplus, no, under the current arrangements with the police, the fines. Sorry, regarding the fines, no, the surplus would come back to the authority, but that would be set out in the agency agreement how the any surplus was dealt with.
But the cost of putting the TRO right, would that be in the agency agreement as well? The cost for that?
Well, that's prior to the application to the Secretary of State, so that is all part of the work to prepare the authority for the CPE application to put right any signs, lines, orders that are incorrect. So that's part of the capital setup costs.
Okay, thank you, Councillor French, and then I'm going to try and bring it to a close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I would like to make it crystal clear. There would be no cost whatsoever to County Council. In Fenland, we're picking up the full bill. Also, Fenland's policy, we will not introduce paid parking unless we're forced to by the government. That is our policy, and one of the reasons is Fenland is one of the most deprived areas in the country, and we're not going to put car parking charges on people who are already struggling.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fuller, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Chairman, I just had a supplementary I didn't get a chance to come back on earlier, and I'm really sorry to labour this point, because you could argue South Cams has nothing to do with me in a sense, but it's just a little bit unclear still, Sonia, I'm afraid, about what you're suggesting, because as Councillor French has just said, Fenland, it's been made very clear to them, as it has to Huntingdonshire, that there can be no subsidy from the County Council. All costs have to be covered by the District Council. And yet there's still this reference, and then listening to Councillor Milnes as well, about potentially in South Cams, the County Council might introduce on-street parking charges to help subsidise CPE. That, to me, is a direct County Council subsidy for South Cams District Council CPE aspiration. So either we need to dismiss that now to ensure it's equitable, or we need to give all the on-street parking revenue currently collected by the County Council in Huntingdonshire and Fenland to those district councils as well. Now, as leader of HDC, I'd be delighted if it was the latter, because I think it's quite a substantial sum of money. But can we just have clarity? Because we can't seriously be operating a system where two districts have been told one thing and another district is being given slightly preferential treatment for some reason. And could we also have clarity on the comment you made, Sonia, around not all districts are in the same place? Because my understanding is Fenland and Hunts are currently in the same place. As Councillor French said, we're itching to go with this. So if it's a case of South Cambs not being ready, and that's going to delay Hunts and Fenland putting this application in April, then I think we need to seriously consider that, because we can't really justify losing another year to let South Cambs catch up with two districts that have been getting on with this and are ready to go.
Sonia, please go ahead.
So in terms of the timetable, certainly if Hunts and Fenland were ready to go and South Cambs wasn't, then we can certainly put in the applications for those two districts ahead of South Cambs. In terms of on-street revenue from Huntingdon, well, the current arrangement is that any surplus does come back to the county council. And if we brought in parking on street charges in South Cambs in due course, then that would be the same situation, that the surplus revenue would come back to the authority.
Sorry, Chairman, that's not an answer to the question, because there's an explicit reference in the report to on-street parking being introduced in South Cambs to help fund CPE. That's not what's going to happen in the other districts.
So I'd like to, Sonia, propose under the recommendations the words to the effect of there is clarification of the funding agreement with the Greater Cambridge Partnership for South Cambs, and that comes back to the committee, which would probably be the November reserved date, if that's okay, because it has to be clarified anyway. Sorry, Councillor Murphy, go ahead.
I was going to suggest something similar because I also didn't have, there wasn't information available for my questions either. There's a great desire to do this, but there are some material bits of information that would be very helpful for this committee. And I wonder if we could, without necessarily slowing down any progress, if we could just have an update at a future committee, please.
Yeah, and at the end of the meeting, I was going to ask members if you were happy with taking the November reserve date rather than waiting till December, and then this would come back to that committee, and we would have clarification of the South Cambs GCP model, which we would debate and vote and approve or not approve. Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we not have an October date instead?
I'll get back to you on that. Wait a minute, Dan. Can I come back to you offline? And just to give reassurance and to Councillor Fuller and to those members, I had said to Sonia that these programmes must be independent and South Cambs should not slow down the other authorities. And that's certainly my intention. Okay. So with those additional guidelines and suggestions, can I ask members if we approve the recommendations, which is to A and B in your report, with the rider that under B, that there will be clarification of the funding agreement and brought back to the November committee for South Cambs. Are we agreed? Thank you, everybody. I don't know about you, I would really value a 5-minute break, but I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on you when you come back to finish by 1 o'clock. So 5 minutes, it's now 12:10, back at 12:15. If anybody is too cold, I think we can turn off the air conditioning. So can I ask John Clark to introduce the report? Thank you, John.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Chair and members. Yes, it is a tradition on the hottest day of the year we talk about winter. The plan in front of you sets out how the authority is going to meet its statutory obligations by carrying out its winter service. The plan is brought to you on an annual basis, but one of the proposals set in front of you is that the plan should be for 4 years, with any changes in that 4-year period put in front of the executive director and the chair and vice chair of this committee. The plan, as I say, looks at how we carry out the winter operations throughout the year. It looks at the training and qualifications of the decision makers, the people who decide when we go gritting, the training and qualifications of the drivers of the vehicles, and also the routes that we're going to cover. In Cambridgeshire currently grits approximately 44% of its highway network. One of the other changes to the paper in front of you to previous years is how we split the county up into domains which decide which areas we're going to go gritting in. Currently it's in 3 domains, and those are Hunts, Southam City, and then finally Fenland and East. And the proposal in front of you is to split it into 5 domains, which will be Hunts as 1, South Cambs as 1, City a 3rd, Fenland, and then East. So 5 separate domains. And the advantage of that is that the accuracy of the forecasts we give mean that we don't need to go gritting in larger areas and therefore wasting resources. So we can pinpoint the gritting in the areas where it's needed based on our policy. Also in front of you, an important part of this document is the procurement process we're undertaken to procure a new winter gritting fleet. The current fleet that's returned in May 2022, and as part of the process of procurement, which is the timetable set out in this document, we need a political sign-off just of your approval that we're carrying out all due diligence in that respect. I think finally, there's and very importantly, the document mentions the winter volunteers, which I know are dear to some of your hearts. Every year we write to the parishes a number of times, and we encourage them to put forward any volunteers. As well as the parishes, we write to the district councils as well. Part of the work we do there is to try and dispel some of the myths. So if you volunteer, you don't have to go gritting every time that we go gritting. It's only when you're able to. We provide materials, plant, and also training, and then support to the volunteers throughout the year. Last year, I think we had 19 parishes with 58 volunteers, and that's some work where we're looking to promote that and increase those figures going forward. Just a couple of risks worth mentioning: recruitment and retention of drivers. Nationally, you've seen that that's an issue, and that's exactly the same for us with the gritting drivers, and that's work we're carrying out at the moment. We're currently recruiting. And then the adoption of any new assets. So, for example, the detrunking of the A14 to the A1307, how we incorporate that into our existing routes. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Questions for John? Go ahead, Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. This is really less of a question than a comment. Very pleased to hear the mention of volunteers. and that we wanted to do more to recruit them. And I just wondered if you could expand on how you plan to increase the number of volunteers, because I do think there's a huge amount of goodwill out there in parishes where they don't get gritting at all.
Yeah, it's something that we've already started some work with our communications team colleagues who are in the room, as well as writing. I think we're going to try and do a bit more, something a bit more suitable for various media. I mean, it is a challenge to recruit volunteers. But I think we just need to look at different ways of, compared to our traditional ways of doing that. So that might be, and I know we've spoken in the past about farmers, for example, people in the rural communities where they can use their equipment to assist. So, I mean, as part of their, writing to the parishes, which we'll continue to do, we're going to provide some posters, that sort of material as well.
May I suggest that county councillors who represent rural areas could be a good asset to you, because most of us attend our parish council meetings on a very regular basis, and obviously we can help promote the message. So if there are any materials that you could email to us, that we can then distribute, that would be really helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. I think I missed Councillor Coots. Go ahead.
Yes, I was interested that you're moving from a 1 year to a rolling 4-year plan, which seems very sensible to me, but 4 years seems to be a long time between this committee's opportunity to scrutinise matters. And I wondered if we could ask the chair, vice chair, as under the section B, to consider bringing back a brief report to us in 12 months' time on how the plan has gone.
John, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I mean, we're happy to do that. I think the idea of making it 4 years was that generally there weren't very large changes in the plan. There may be some minor route changes which can be agreed at a local level, albeit this year in front of you is the procurement, which will be, if that goes through, that's going to be with us for 7 years or so. The domain change. Those are very, very large changes, and the resources we have, we're not looking to do lots of changes every year. So yes, happy to bring back information or a report, but it was really trying to, last few days, there hasn't been many big scale changes in this report.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm conscious you want to finish by 1, so I'll be very brief, because Councillor King said most of what I wanted to say. I represent 11 parish councils, so I'm very keen. I've got one tonight, and I will definitely mention this about the volunteers. So I'd welcome sort of details that how we can, get you more volunteers around the county, certainly in my patch. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other comments or inputs? I think what I heard from Councillor Coots, which John agreed to, is under B, delegating significant changes to the plan to the Executive Director, Chair and Vice Chair, and an annual update. I presume broadly at this time of the year, John, if that's okay with you.
Yep, that's fine with me.
So members, on that basis, we go forward with A to C. The recommendations that are here with that small annual update from the Chair and Vice Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you, John. So now we come to item 9, which is the Finance Monitoring Report. And I think Sarah Haywood, Finance Manager, is introducing this.
It's on. Hello. Hi. Right. Thank you, Chair. This is a finance monitoring report as at the end of July. There's relatively little change actually. On the revenue side, the bottom line position is a forecast underspend of £205,000. You will see in the detail in Appendix 1 that there are overs and unders, and the sort of the main issue is that there's some losses in income due to COVID on parking enforcement and bus operations, including park and ride. But there was provision set in the budget on the executive director line in the business plan last year to offset this, and so those two net off to balance each other off. That's all I was going to say on the actual forecast, because there is so little change. But just to also draw your attention to the fact that in Appendix B of the report, it details the procurement approach for interim resources in place and economy. And if there's any questions on those, Steve Cox can answer there. That's all I was going to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions to Sarah before we go to Steve? Councillor Mills.
I'm sorry, I don't know whether it's appropriate now or later. I've just got a question about the cost of interims versus permanent staff, and where the balance lies, because it seems to me that we're spending an awful lot of additional money by hiring temporary staff rather than having people permanently on the payroll. So that's my question.
Yeah, indeed, and under Appendix B, that is something we're asked to look at. Councillor Murphy, and then if I ask Steve to pick up some of those points.
Thank you. Am I right in assuming that you're planning to adopt, I don't know who, but the question's to, you're planning to adopt a kind of insourcing model where you effectively have people on the payroll earning normal salaries but are assigned to projects, or is that something that you're aspiring to do?
Is that Steve? No, I think that's for you.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. On the second one, first, yes, that's absolutely the case. So you'll know, members, I've circulated details of the transformation programme that we're going through in highways and transport. It started last year. It's still running through a combination of improvements to our systems and processes, the controlled environment, a training program for staff, but also changes in senior management. And what that's done is created a churn that's meant that we need to keep going, obviously, with projects and delivery. So I have taken in quite a number of interims in order to make sure that delivery continues over the period of that transformation. But the intention, absolutely now, starting with the recruitment that you'll be aware of to the director position, Sue Proctor, who will arrive in November, and also to 2 assistant director positions, who also, David Allett, as you know, has started, and a gentleman called John Munslow will start in November. Will then, alongside the recruitment into the highways project delivery team that Alex Deans is leading, will absolutely start now to bring in permanent members of staff into roles that are currently covered by interims. So it is actually part of the churn of transformation that you do need to bring in the flexibility that comes with interim staff. And in terms of the costs, I think it's 1.1 million I've indicated in the paper. The majority of that would have been met by staff costs anyway, but there is an increment above that that we pay for interims, given the flexibility that the interims bring and expertise in some cases. And if I could just add on the consents team, which is also included in Appendix B, we've spoken before about the A428, East West Rail, the MVV proposal at Wisbeach, and many Transport and Works Act order schemes coming forward around Cambridge in particular. We need to have that expertise in the organisation to make sure we get the very best out of proposals, if they're proposals that we're not objecting to, of course, so that we get the best deal for the county. So the flexibility and expertise of interims is an important part of the overall mix of the staff resource that we have, but the direction of travel is absolutely to move from interims to permanent, and that process has already started at the senior management level.
Thank you. Councillor King, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you very much indeed for that. I was just wondering, I was under the impression that our underspend was rather larger than $250,000. You're quite confident that that is the correct figure, are you? Okay. Right. Okay, that's good. Well, no, it's not good, because it would have been nice to have had it bigger. And this is really a question for or a comment for Steve Cox, which I've burdened you with previously. It's in my area. It's a red, and it's listed as Sutton Road, Leverington Common. Could we remove the Sutton Road, because it doesn't affect Sutton Road at all? This is wholly Leverington Common. And the reason I'm keen to get that corrected is because the parish council is considering putting in an LHI bid for Sutton Road. So I don't want any confusion that any bid has previously been submitted for Sutton Road, because it hasn't. So this is just Leverington Common. Thank you very much.
Steve, do you want to comment on that specifically, then go to Councillor Sharp?
Well, just to say yes, we'll certainly do that, Councillor King.
Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chairman. Two comments. One is on the HR report, which was touched on just now, page, I think it's 230. It's dated, and unless I'm missing the obvious, but it's dated as a report as at the 31st of January. And I just wonder why we've got data that's sort of 7 or 8 months out of date, would be my first comment. And the second comment, it's a similar one, and it's on page 217. It's in my ward, and I just want, it's a red one, it's Wesley Waterless under Councillor Shooter, who's my predecessor. Maybe offline again, get some more. I'm aware of a bid that went in there a couple of years ago because I was involved in it. I'm aware of another bid that's going to be coming your way at the end of this month that they're working on. So I just, if I could get some more details offline, happy to take that one offline. Thank you.
Okay.
Shall I just mention the HR data? Unfortunately, when LGSS, ceased to exist, the responsibility for running the HR reports was then passed to the business intelligence team, and they have been struggling to run the same reports, and they apparently the reports are now available, but because there's been some deterioration in the quality of the information during that period, we now need to just make sure that the establishment is completely up to date so they are accurate. So they should be available for next committee.
Just to come briefly back then. So going onward, then we're going to get reports that are more up to date. Yeah,
that's the intention.
Great. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So members, if there are no more questions on the finance monitoring report, thank you very much. Sarah will adopt the recommendations and endorse the procurement approach. Thank you very much. Okay, members, if we can move on to item 10, which is the Royston to Granta Park strategic growth and transport. And I believe that is Jeremy who will take us through this. Jeremy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report sets out the results of the first stage of the Royston to Granta Park strategic growth and transport study, which the County Council commissioned with funding from the Combined Authority, which was agreed in March 2019 by the CA Board. The study is basically looking at growth and transport issues in the, well, we try not to call it the A505 corridor, but basically the area between Royston and Granta Park, between the A10 and the A11, effectively, and in particular the area to the southeast of Cambridge, where there is a significant number of science parks and the like that are vital to the high-tech economy of the Greater Cambridge area. And obviously, you'll be more than aware, many of those are planning further growth beyond their current sizes. So the study undertook a transport audit report, a modelling report, an options assessment report, and a preliminary strategic outline business case. And this report sets out the broad conclusions of that work. Option sifting was carried out, and the fundamental recommendation was that a number of the interventions looked at in the study on the transport network be taken forward for the next stage of assessment. These include looking at pedestrian and cycle connectivity, and obviously mindful of points made earlier on active travel, obviously equestrian and and mobility impaired access as well, to put that one to bed before we get to questions, hopefully. Public transport options in terms of, both in terms of service levels on the existing road network and potential for, expansions of work undertaken by the Greater Cambridge Partnership on the CSET scheme. Looking at the road network, local pinch point enhancements have been considered, and safety improvements on the route, which is a very busy route, but actually, compared to some other roads that are equally busy, has stretches that are relatively poor design standard compared to the modern standards that you would usually put in road, for routes of that nature. And it also considered whether major improvements to the road network, either on the A505 itself or in terms of bypass alignments, would be justified. Now, the recommendations in front of you, are hopefully self-explanatory. I would draw attention to recommendation E, which relates to improvements at the A11, M11 junction, and particularly the option of bringing in additional slips. The technical work undertaken didn't identify a particular, well, it didn't indicate a strong case for consideration of funding of that option for a range of reasons. In particular, that it wouldn't be a significant saving in journey time, and it would be very high cost. Also, that Highways England were not at all keen with the idea of putting in additional slip roads at that junction. However, there is a significant groundswell of local opinion and local member opinion that that option should not be ruled out at this point. So an option that is available to committee is to consider those improvements on the same basis as we recommend under paragraphs 213 and 214 in relation to improvements on, or major improvements on, the A505 corridor itself, which is basically the government have indicated to the combined authority that we should not look at major improvements to roads such as this, and indeed directly in the context of the A10, until we've demonstrated that more limited local improvements will not provide the benefits you're looking at. So an alternative recommendation to recommendation E would be to consider, again, options for the A11, M11 junction in that context, should work demonstrate that more local improvements on the A505 itself would not actually provide the benefits that are being looked for. So I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Jeremy, for preempting one of my questions, which was the removal of the option to consider the Junction 9 always. Because, as you rightly say, the local members and the steering group made it very clear that they wanted that maintained as an option, because this the 505, particularly is at the junction with the M11 Duxford, is very busy, and it's very notable that the congestion at that junction has returned already, where elsewhere since the pandemic, some of the congestion points are not returned to what they were pre-pandemic. I think the volume of traffic is something like 28,000 vehicles a day, and any of you that travel in that area will know how awkward the traffic is. We also, and you haven't made mention of it in your verbal report, but we also had a project which was to look at improvements to the Whittlesford Parkway, commissioned, I think, again by the Combined Authority, and the county subbed it out to a consultancy. And again, locally, so I'm a member of the Shelford and Whittlesford Rail User Group, and we were very disappointed that more improvements didn't come forward in that suggestion or in that proposal of the master plan. We felt the lack of ambition was regretful, and the relatively small changes that are being, the incremental changes that are being suggested in this report, again, are somewhat disappointing from a local member perspective, when we have so many of the primary bioscience buildings and companies in this area. So whether it's the Genome Campus, Grant Park, Babraham Science Park, and hopefully in the future Huawei coming to Sawston. So I just expressed some reservations about the lack of ambition both in the Whittlesford Parkway and on this scheme altogether. I'm not convinced that it will see any major improvement over that congestion that we see today.
Jeremy, do you want to comment?
Certainly. Firstly, Councillor Milnes, on traffic, it's actually the busiest section pre-pandemic, took about 28,000 vehicles a day, which it up there with the busiest sections of road in the county that the county council manages. This is roughly the same as the A141
Sorry, Jeremy. I thought I'd said 28,000, maybe.
Oh, apologies. I heard 20. The advantages of being remote. Yes, I think your characterisation of the road as one of the busiest in Cambridgeshire that we manage is absolutely right. It's only roads that are managed by Highways England that are busier. Indeed, actually, there are parts of the 505 that are busier than parts of the A11. So in that context, yes, it is a very busy road and it isn't of a particularly high standard. I think in terms of the level of ambition, I think there are a number of different elements that need to be brought into play. And obviously, yeah, carbon is a big one of them. And I think this is partly the context in which government and the combined authority are coming at it, in that they would prefer us to firstly get options that give people other choices before they go to major road building, yeah, as the solution. And I think there's obviously an issue there for members to debate and and come to a view on as to what is the right solution in any case, and that needs to be informed by the technical work. But I think in terms of congestion and delay on the 505 corridor, I would hope that the work that we were able to do as part of the next stage of the CA confirmed funding would hopefully allow members to take a balanced view on what the right priorities were and whether we do need to be more ambitious in terms of what we're looking for on the transport network as a whole and the road network in this area.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Are there any other member comments or input? I mean, based on the discussions, what Councillor Milnes has said, and I think Jeremy's accepted that under recommendation E, we would just delete the word not. So then that would read the option, all junction 9, all movements option should be included for consideration. Strategic business case. Yes.
Thank
Amanda
you.
Smith.
It was just a quickie. I saw there was an email come through via Dan from Susan van der Ven, which I've looked at. Does her comments get taken into account?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a good reminder. Dan, yes, I think you have comments from Councillor van der Ven.
Yes, thank you. So comments from Councillor van der Ven. I very much welcome the A505 study. The A505 serves to profoundly sever communities all along it. Practical active travel over and along it is not safe and unsurprisingly rarely seen. Vehicle access at its junctions is daunting and risky. The A505 NMU bridge, I fully endorse steps to progress the A505 NMU bridge at the A10. A key short distance active travel link that will enable safe cycling and walking for travel, for work, school and the local economy. Strong local support is evident in the multiple financial pledges from local businesses at Melbourne Science Park, Royston Industrial Site, Royston Town Council and North Herts District Council, and fundraising efforts of local residents in the South Cambs villages in Royston. This bridge will fundamentally improve active travel connectivity in the area. Bassingbourne A505, A1198 active travel pinch point. An opportunity to improve this pinch point exists with Herts County Council's current efforts to create a public right-of-way over the Ivy Farm Bridge connecting Royston and Bassingbourn, which would open a safe pedestrian link to employment and rail links in Royston, as well as employment and schools in Bassingbourn. Please support Hertfordshire County Council's work on behalf of Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire communities. And finally, Melbourne New Road Junction with the A505. Access in both directions is difficult, especially with the right turn out of New Road towards Royston. This results in an avoidance of the A505, resulting in increased cut through via unsuitable village roads. Please consider this junction for remedial measures.
Thank you very much. So members, we have, sorry. So members, unless there are any other inputs with that amendment to recommendation E, that we would agree with the recommendations A to F. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Councillor Minns.
Yeah, just excuse me, it was a while ago since I read this. Are we reconvening the steering group?
Yeah, so under item F, so I've made suggestions to Councillor Matt Maguire. I think he's been away, but as soon as he's back, we will confirm that. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. Okay, members, if we can move to, please, item 11, which is the business planning proposals. I think this is the opening update and review as part of the process for next year, and hand over to Steve to take us through this.
Thank you, Chair. This is really just to introduce the business planning process for this next financial year. There's a lot of context here that's common across all committees, but the focus on the areas that are being explored are, I think, start on paragraph or section 4 onwards on the implications possibly for Highways and Transport Committee. It's really just a flag where we're going to be looking at options. So any thoughts or comments would be welcome at this stage before we come back to committee later in the autumn with business cases that will be based on this list, but not necessarily all of them will be taken forward. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any questions for Steve on the high level plan? We're also asked to comment on the list of proposals, which is in section 5.2. That is a little bit of well, it's an initial list of ideas around savings and or income generation, but no numbers have been applied to any of those at the moment. So it's literally the opening views. Are there any comments or suggestions? Councillor Milnes and Councillor King and Councillor Smith.
Just a quick question. South Cambs has introduced an LED programme which is now more or less complete, and that's had the advantage of significant savings on electricity. But we've got a PFI contract for the lighting in county, and I wonder whether that means that PFI contract would need to be rewritten to accommodate an LED programme, which I'd welcome.
So maybe let Dom comment, and then I'll come to Councillor King and Smith.
So the current contract is flexible enough to allow us to make changes to it. So it will be an investor safe proposal. The lanterns that we currently use in Cambridgeshire are actually quite efficient anyway, but they're not LED. However, before we understand what the full implication is, we'll need to do some work with Balfour Beatty, because over the years, the cost of LED lanterns has come down significantly, and the efficiency has increased as well. So the last time we assessed this, it didn't prove to be fruitful, but it's probably worth a relook to see whether that will come out with anything. The other thing to bear in mind, alongside just an LED program, would be the use of dimming. So dimming the lanterns, which also saves electricity, and having done this exercise in a number of other places, it's hardly noticeable to the human eye that even if you dim the lanterns by 50%, you can barely tell the difference. So it's worth looking at it.
I think it was Councillor Smith first.
Thank you. Mine's just briefly on the list of potential savings: highways, drainage maintenance strategy and operations. I don't think we should be cutting money to drainage. I can't get a drain cleaned out now. And I don't think I'm the only one either. 8 months in one case. So I think he would struggle to cut money in the drainage. And I don't know what other people think, but
Dom, or Steve, do you want to comment?
I was going to say, I think this is the reverse. This is about how we can use innovation and technology better to maintain our drainage perhaps more efficiently than we are doing at the moment. So it's about an investment rather than a saving.
okay, so we're not going to be cutting money in drainage maintenance.
No, the idea here is that we use better ways of investigating issues in our drains across the county so that we can spot in a more timely way where we think issues are going to arise, so we can be more efficient in our drainage operations. So it's about investment in innovation to make the service more efficient than cutting money.
Okay, thank you. I just had to check.
Dom, would you like to comment also?
Yes, Councillor Smith. As you know, drainage is on a cyclical basis at the minute. Not all drains get reviewed because sometimes there's a parked car over the top of it when you try to actually inspect it. So this will be the use of technology such as telemetry, which will be put into drains that we know are a problem time and time again. What that telemetry does is tell us when the drains are starting to fill. It allows us to then send the maintenance crews out in a more timely manner to review them and to deal with them. So it's not about making funding cuts to it. It's about being a lot more clever and more sophisticated in the way that we clear the drains. So we'll start to move away from that cyclical model to a new high-tech model.
Great, thank you. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just really wanted to congratulate Steve and Dom for this list of possible economies. I think it's very sensible, and I look forward to seeing the more detailed iteration of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So members, any other comments or suggestions? It's to note the overview and the context that Steve talked about. Councillor Beckett, go ahead.
I just wanted to come back to street lighting again previously. It's been a little bit of a problem in my area. Some streets where they've lost 40% of the street lights in the process of moving to LEDs, and that's led to issues of antisocial behaviour, et cetera, et cetera. So can I just make sure that when we do look at cutting money off street lighting and moving to LEDs, obviously sometimes we cut the number of poles due to the fact that they're more powerful, but we actually look at sight lines as well, and that we don't reduce any of the effect of street lighting for our residents.
Yeah, sure. That's the saving isn't about the reduction of columns, it's about the reduction of electricity payments. That's where the real saving comes in.
But it's a very important point. Okay, members, so I think if you are happy to accept the recommendations, the overview and context, and we commented as we did on the list of proposals. Thanks very much. So members, if we come to the last item, which is the agenda plan. I know we had questions raised, which I'm just going to throw out to the floor. We've got a 4th of November reserve date for a committee. I know that there was some questions, if perhaps we could answer offline for an October date. Would that be okay? And we'll try and get that to you as soon as possible, given where we are. For the November date, are there issues that members particularly would want to go on to the November agenda? From my point of view, I'd like to be able to do more of a deep dive on HGV. That's slightly unfair because Sonia's not here, but that's one thing that's top of mind. Councillor Smith. Yeah, so that would either come back in the October one, if possible, or at very latest in November. Councillor King, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you very much for that HGV one. Sonia facilitated a meeting about the Guyherne roundabout and the temporary weight restrictions that was very illuminating. And one of the things that concern me particularly is that we don't actually have a policy for this. And I think, given the works coming up with with Highways England, that we should develop one quickly. And we had a presentation at our last committee, or the one before, about some of the possible ideas for discouraging HGVs from using inappropriate roads. So I think we do need to incorporate all of that, including the temporary weight restrictions, into a policy. And I would really welcome that, Chair. The second thing I would suggest is I do think we ought to have something about this multi-user surface that I referred to earlier. I know that's coming in the active travel, but maybe we could separate that out from the active travel so that we could have a look at that, at the different surfaces that might be available and when they could be most effectively used. And finally, I just wanted to say how much I welcome seeing appointments to outside bodies back on the agenda plan, because I do think it's important for the sake of transparency that that does come to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Murphy, sorry, I think we missed you.
That's right. To come back to what needs to be on the agenda for another date, let's say November, it's King's Parade. Please, an update on the A14 item I mentioned in relation to Bar Hill. Active travel, there's several strands to this. There's the consultation from Mill Road, there's wider issues about information for the current tranche of schemes, etc. So there's, and also the items, the matters that are coming from Greater Cambridge Partnership as well. So there's a multifaceted number of things for active travel, which I think need to come to a committee. Thank you.
I would support all of those, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both. Steve, do you want to comment on the forward plan at all and those issues and items?
I think my main comment would be about if we have an October and or a November meeting is just getting the number of items right, so that we get the key ones through in November and perhaps the remainder in December. So if we could take away those and perhaps work with Peter and Jerry to sort of work through what we can bring in October or November and then into December, but recognising particularly I think on active travel, that is something that we do need to bring through.
Councillor Mills, go ahead.
You mentioned HGVs, Chair, and the government are continuing their longer semi-trailer trials, and this is particularly pertinent to those of us that live in rural areas where there is effectively no control offered by signage, so it remains to be a police-controlled matter, and we know with the amount of resources that the police have, that they're unlikely to do anything effective if that comes to pass. So I think I'd like to see that item discussed on an agenda as soon as possible, please.
Thank you. And certainly take on board and have a discussion scheduled with Steve on the forward programme for active travel and how we discuss that. Okay, are there any other items? No. I said I would finish at 1 o'clock. I hope I didn't pressurize you too much. Thank you everybody for your attendance, the officer attendance. Thanks to Dan for your support and all of those joining online. Safe journey home.